It's a development that few, if any, saw coming, especially not at this moment, and perhaps not as quickly as it happened. In a rapid lightning advance, Syrian rebels pummeled through government-held territory, taking one major city after another over 12 days. First Aleppo, then Hama and Homs. There was no turning back, though, after they surrounded and entered the capital of Damascus between Saturday and Sunday, officially bringing an end not only to Bashar al-Assad's 24-year rule, but also to over 5 decades of Baath party leadership in Syria. For more on the ground, we're going to turn to journalist Danny Makki, who is in the Syrian capital. Danny, thank you so much for joining us. Things have, of course, moved very quickly. What is the mood like where you are in the Syrian capital of Damascus?
Well, the mood in Damascus at the moment is definitely one of jubilation, getting over the fact that this 60-year-old Baath party is now finished from Syria after a 15-year war, which has really taken the lives of so many Syrians and kind of divided, fragmented the country. So getting over or past that challenge was something which I think all Syrians came together to celebrate rightfully today and yesterday and for the past week as well. I mean, ever since people started to hear that Aleppo was kind of given up without, a shot being fired, and Hama was taken after that, Idlib, Homs and Damascus were taken at the same time yesterday, everything kind of started to seem ominous. But no one expected these huge implosions to occur yesterday, where you literally had tens of thousands of Syrian soldiers just putting their weapons aside, taking off their uniforms and just chucking it into the streets. It's something that we've never actually seen before in Syria, despite, viewing a more than decade long war. So the joy that's being felt by Syrians today is something which is probably shared across the country, because Syrians in government-held areas and outside of government-held areas have suffered immensely under this. Under the authorities and under Assad, who fled the country yesterday. So for the time being, it's one of celebration, and quickly that will turn to a transition period where Syrians will have to come together to, work out how to actually run and govern the country. And that's a huge challenge in itself, and one which hasn't been done before by the opposition. So it presents new challenges, new ideas have to be implemented. And so far, the behavior of a lot of the opposition groups has been very sensible, and that's something which has helped in their march to Damascus. Going forward, more of that would definitely create a better environment within Syria.
It's probably too early to tell, Danny Makki, but in talking to the Syrian people that you've spoken with thus far, how do they feel about the rebel group that has spearheaded al-Assad's downfall? Is there hope that they will continue to be reasonable, to use your word earlier, and that they will respect a peaceful transition?
Well, thus far, the actual presence of HTS has not actually been seen in Damascus, because most of the fighters which actually arrived at the city came from around Damascus and from the south of the country, mainly from Daraa, Mu'addamiya, places where a reconciliation agreement had been reached and kind of held for a couple of years. So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has not actually been in Damascus until much later, and even then, it remains to be seen what the kind of behavior is going to be. But if it's anything like what we've seen in Aleppo and other locations, then that kind of behavior would be deemed relatively sensible for Damascus, which is obviously the capital. It's it's a more secular location. There's a lot of different diverse sects and ethnicities in Damascus as well. It's a melting pot. So definitely there will be, very watchful eyes on how that's kind of handled. But for the time being, it seems that remnants from the previous regime will take part in some sort of form in the transition, and that's something which will be positive to keep that continuity, because whenever you have change, you need an element of continuity. And Syrians have been suffering both in Damascus and the rest of the country, especially in Damascus because, for example, there hasn't been electricity for a number of days now. I mean, Syrians are now waking up to maybe 1 hour of electricity and every single day, and that's something which needs to be solved in a very speedy matter so that that initial honeymoon period doesn't start fading away.
Danny, you mentioned the participation of at least some members potentially from the former regime. How much support do you think al-Assad had, at least in Damascus and in recent months? What do you think will become of his supporters?
Well, conspicuously, that kind of support was very fragile because in the space of weeks, we've seen almost a complete. Not just a collapse, but an absolute melting away of a huge number of forces. And the Syrian army is numbered at over 100,000. Those kind of numbers haven't been seen anywhere in the previous week where you've had the fiercest fighting. So evidently a lot of the fighters and the soldiers who are new conscripts, I'll remind kind of your viewers that Assad issued a number of military decrees over the past 2 years, cutting the size of the army, ending the element of forced conscription. So a lot of the newer fighters were new recruits with no previous battle experience. Now, when you put them in front of al-Sham and other very well-experienced, well-armed and trained groups in Aleppo and Idlib, then there's going to be a mismatch on the front lines. And with that morale, it's something, a momentum as well. It's hard to maintain that when you're losing consistently. And Assad's biggest problem was that he didn't really have any good pieces of news for the past maybe 1 week or 10 days since he left the country. And that's something which really contributed to his downfall. When you have a population which is used to at least an army holding its own within battles, lose an entire province the size of Aleppo without a shot being fired, it really shows people in the country that, okay, something's not right here. So from that, the support element was clearly not there. And the closer things came to Damascus, the more the leadership became exhausted in making too many tactical decisions, and soldiers started defecting, and soldiers just didn't want to fight because the economic situation is so bad. And why would you want to continue fighting when you've had a 15-year-old war and you're fighting for really nothing at the moment? So part of that does play a role. I mean, the Syrian people are very war-weary at the moment, and that's something which really worked against Assad.
Danny Makki in Damascus, thank you so much for coming on the show.